hallelujah. I'm gonna sit at the welcome table. I'm gonna sit at the welcome table one of these days. I'm gonna sit at the welcome table. I'm gonna sit at the welcome table one of these days. Hallelujah. I'm gonna sit at the welcome table. I'm gonna sit at the welcome table one of these days. I'm gonna be a registered voter. I'm gonna be a registered voter one of these days. Hallelujah. I'm gonna be a registered voter. I'm gonna be a registered voter one of these days.
Tuskegee was a unique and phenomenal place to grow up because although it was a small town, in many ways it felt like a big city in the sense that lots of people continuously came to Tuskegee. With the university there, it was a mecca of intelligence and intellectual discussion. And you know, very fervent kinds of discussion about the issues of the day.
Honestly, it was Mayberry. You didn't just sit at home. You went out after school and you would play till it was dark. It was almost life in slow motion. Nobody really got in a hurry. Everybody knew everybody. My neighborhood was very tight-knit. There was just one block that made a little T at the end of it, and there must have been 16 of us kids that lived on that block growing up playing together.
I think it was probably one of the best places for a kid to grow up. But we spent a lot of time outside as kids. We did all kinds of things. We played games and had baseball teams. We went berry picking. We went bicycle riding.
I was born in Tuskegee, February the 23rd, 1946. In fact, I was born at the Air Base Hospital, which was right in the Novasoga area. It was right where the Tuskegee Flying Airmen were.
There was always something to do. I was a Girl Scout, and there was a Girl Scout camp during the summer, and swimming. Every day we were doing something.
When you grow up in a rural community, you have a sense of belonging. It's a part of you. It belongs to you. We didn't think nothing about playing with our black friends. It was just something natural, and we never thought anything about it.
I was always aware of the segregation of whites and blacks. In church, school, the movies, neighborhoods, and in all social areas. I don't recall ever interacting with any black children or talking with any black adults who were not maids, yard workers, babysitters, or their children. We loved our maid Luella and knew to be respectful and kind to her. Her status as parent like Mama would not tolerate racial disrespect or jokes. As a child, I remember being saddened by the condition of the Negro quarters, and I felt sorry for the children I saw walking to and from those homes. Tuskegee Institute, on the other hand, was a source of pride. The presence of the Institute made us feel that Tuskegee was a progressive community that was trying to improve the education and quality of life for blacks.
I was born in Montgomery, Alabama. There was no hospital in Tuskegee. I attended Tuskegee Public Schools for grades 1 through 12, and my mother, Dorothy Gillick-Aiken, was a teacher there. Everyone called her Miss Dot.
I first moved to Tuskegee in 1958. My dad came back to teach in the electrical construction department. So at the time, I was 10 years old. I turned 11 that year, and I was a sixth grader at the Washington Public School in Tuskegee.
My family goes back to the 19th century in Macon County. My father was John Fletcher Segrest Jr. My mother was Frances Cobb Segrest. Her grandfather was John Massey, who was president of the Alabama Conference Female College, which moved to Montgomery to become Huntington College in the early part of the 20th century.
Tuskegee was a welcoming, wonderful little aristocratic town. We were told that there were 7 black people for every white person at that point. We had a very pleasant relationship with the black community, although it seemed like a paternalistic system. They worked for us, and we treated them well. There's one lady in particular I remember who was our cook. When she was ill, I made a pot of soup and ran it over to the quarter, the area of town that was primarily inhabited by African Americans, and fed her soup with a spoon to get her well. And I remember her children, a little boy and a little girl, would come to meet her when she got off from work each day. They'd sit on our back steps, and sometimes I'd bring them cookies and milk. We got along well with everyone in our town, including our cook's children. But I never once thought to invite them in.
In the summertime, there were baseball games. There were swimming pools, and we went to summer school in the morning. Everybody, that was the morning activity. You go to summer school in the morning, you go home, kind of rest, get up, and then you either go swim or the boys played baseball. Yeah, we didn't sit around too much, but the relationship between the blacks and the whites was separate.
Segregation. Segregation was the order of the day when I was admitted to practice law in Alabama in September 1954. We were segregated from the cradle to the grave, from the toilet to the train, from the courtroom to the classroom. Segregated classrooms were of special concern to African Americans because the lack of access to equal education was like a big weight around our necks, always holding us back. During slavery time, of course, it had become illegal in Alabama and elsewhere in the South to teach African Americans to read and write. This was largely because of the fear, by whites, of slave revolts, as it was correctly assumed that the more education a slave gained, the more difficult it would be to keep him in bondage. After slavery came separate but equal, one of history's big lies. The disparity between the white and African American educational systems was huge in every respect.
From the conditions of facilities
To teachers' salaries.
From the quality of textbooks.
The availability of school buses.
From the existence of libraries.
To the length of the school year.
That African Americans gained education, and all under these circumstances, was remarkable. And yet, the thirst for knowledge had always been enormous in our communities. We often built our own schools, sometimes with no help and sometimes with the aid of private or religious philanthropy, and whatever public funding we could get.
All of us went to Chambliss Children's House. It was an elementary school that was located on Tuskegee's campus. Most of the education students on campus used that as a training school. Most of the kids were either children of professors on campus or they were children of the people who worked for the VA hospital. It was a very good school with teachers who cared about your success. They knew you and your family.
We were always taking trips through reading or film or plays to other countries. We had wonderful teachers there, wonderful teachers who really cared about learning and cared about whether or not we were focused and motivated enough to understand the importance of education. So it was a wonderful experience.
You didn't have a lot of behavior problems. You went to school and you didn't dare misbehave because everybody knew one another. The word would get around.
As I look back on it, Tuskegee was a little color conscious and a little elitist in a lot of ways, but at the time you don't see that. The system of institutional racism taught that light skin was prettier and of greater value than dark skin. The lesson of making divisions based on skin color was in parts played out in the Tuskegee community.
We had 30% white and 70% black back then. I knew black people all my life, but you had two circles of people. They overlapped, but there was a difference. People talk about how idyllic the 50s were. They may have been for some people, but they weren't seeing the whole picture.
Before I begin my talk with you, I want to ask for a few minutes' patience while I say something that is on my heart. I want to thank those home folks of my county who first gave an anxious country boy his opportunity to serve in state politics. I shall always owe a lot to those who gave me my first opportunity to serve. This is the day of my inauguration as the governor of the state of Alabama. And on this day, I feel a deep obligation to renew my pledges, my covenants with you, the people of this great state. Today, I have stood where once Jefferson Davis stood and took an oath to my people. It is very appropriate, then, that from this cradle of the Confederacy, this very heart of the great Anglo-Saxon Southland, that today we sound the drum for freedom as have our generations of forebears before us done, time and time again through history. Let us rise to the call of freedom-loving blood that is in us and send our answer to the tyranny that clanks its chains upon the South. In the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, I draw a line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever.
Conversations around civil rights were always present in our house. We were very conscious of the race issues growing up, even as little kids. We would listen to the conversations that my mother and father would have about the Montgomery boycott and the things that were going on there.
Race relations were, of course, I'm coming from the white person's standpoint. At the time, race relations were okay, but they were okay because segregation was okay.
To me, there didn't seem to be any racial tension between the two different races because we worked together, played together and everything. And I don't think, well, nobody really liked to think about things back in those days. We went to our school and did our thing, and the blacks did theirs. We'd come together after school, do things, talk, and have a good time. And I don't think, well, at least I know I didn't. Back in those days, I was more interested in girls and playing ball and being with my friends. It was just something we didn't have to deal with.
The only black friends that I had were older guys who worked at the service station, pumping gas, you know. Or we would go and visit my mother's mother and father in Choctaw County. They had a black man and his family who lived on their place, looked after things, and they had kids my age, and we would play. You know, when you got through playing in the yard, you didn't go back into the house together. When the integration began, race relations began to be adversely affected and go downhill. A lot of the white people of the community did not have the vision of this is the way it should be and the way it's going to be. With the exception of a few, such as some visionaries in Tuskegee, and Andy Hornsby's dad was one of them.
My father, Sheriff Preston Hornsby, people respected him and some people feared him. So even though they may have disagreed with him, they didn't. Well, by and large, they liked him. He's extremely personable, and they found it hard to dislike him over his views. As sheriff, he hired the first black deputy sheriff. He just didn't believe in mistreating people. He had policies with his deputies that you just don't automatically hit somebody if they were drunk and said something inappropriate. He just had a better, well, he believed in enforcing the law fairly.
In contrast to other peaceful policing efforts in Alabama during these turbulent times, Birmingham continues to see clashes between protesters and city officials. This past weekend, over 1,500 people were arrested, and fire hoses and dogs were used to subdue protesting crowds. Bull Connor, Commissioner of Public Safety, authorized the use of force. President Kennedy has spoken with Governor Wallace and is eager for the situation to be calmed before federal forces may be needed to regain the peace.
Well, at the time, it was just the thought of that if you ever allow one black child into the school, your way of life is destroyed forever. The peaceful, calm existence will be gone. We would have chaos from then on. That was what you heard. We had very fine black families in our town, but the prevailing view among the white people was that all the insidious bad things that were perpetuated in the black community would certainly encompass the whole.
My mother was a very proud, confident, very smart woman who was, in many ways, fearless to those kinds of messages. So when we would go into a store like Montgomery Fair to shop, and you would see the water fountains with the signs on them, colored and white, and the bathroom doors with the signs on them, if you could go to the bathroom there, my mother would insist that we ignore those signs. And if we wanted water, whichever water fountain was available, that you used that water fountain. I remember very vividly one day in Montgomery Fair when my brother was drinking from the white water fountain.
Don't you see that colored fountain? That is for you.
And my mother said, first of all, don't yell at my son like that. And the second thing is, my son will drink from any water fountain he wants to in this store.
He cannot drink from that.
And my mother said, well, then our money doesn't spend here. And we left. I remember in the car going home just the quiet at first. because we were all trying to absorb what had just happened. And then my mother giving this wonderful history lesson from Montgomery back to Tuskegee about segregation and about the law and so forth, but telling us that we were all just as valuable as any other human being. Even though it might not appear so, we had the same rights as any other person, and we were always to stand up for those rights.
In Jackson, Mississippi, a member of the Segregationist White Citizens Council who broke with his church because of its soft stand against integration was charged Sunday with the ambush killing of civil rights leader Medgar Evers. The assailant was widely known for his outspoken views against integration and wrote letters to the editors of several newspapers expressing his stand against race mixing. Medgar Evers worked to desegregate schools in Mississippi, particularly the University of Mississippi, and also fought for voting rights. He was 37.
The dramatic and violent events of Montgomery and Birmingham seemed a long way from Tuskegee. One night in the early 1960s, my family was surprised to drive by a Ku Klux Klan gathering in a field near the Torch Cafe on Highway 29 between Auburn and Tuskegee. My mother was disgusted, my father protective, and we were all very upset. I wondered what kind of men could be so scary and hateful.
My friend called me. He had a night job of working on the police radio station, and he alerted me, and I cut it down pretty quick. Yeah, I cut it down. It was two dummies. It was a black and a white. And the white one had a star and a little cowboy gun belt reflecting the sheriff, and the black was his black deputy. And they hung in effigy with a noose over their necks in the city square in Tuskegee.
My mother would do things that you knew were probably not the safe things to do. She would refuse to go to the back door, or she wouldn't buy clothes at the department store if they wouldn't allow us to use the bathroom. She was a proud woman who fought the system as best she could. My father, on the other hand, had to endure so much more because he knew that he would probably face death if he was overtly defiant. Despite all he must have endured, he never allowed us to see his fear. And I never saw him subjugate himself. He was a proud black man who tried to live his truth for his children. He was my hero.
There was unrest among the people in town. I think they were worried about mixing their children. I guess it had been one way for so long, and it had worked in Tuskegee, except it really was not working for the black children. My mother, Dot Aiken, who taught at Tuskegee Public, was really never prejudiced. She believed in integration and teaching the children, and so she knew what she was going to do.
Even though the U.S. Supreme Court decision in the case of Brown versus Board of Education had been on the record since 1954, there was still no public elementary and secondary school integration in Alabama. 1963. The African American community in Alabama realized that the most difficult area to integrate would be the state's elementary and high schools. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the NAACP spearheaded most of the litigation involving school desegregation in Alabama. The legal strategy was to select forums where there were federal district judges who would be most likely to follow the law established in Brown versus Board of Education and rule favorably in these cases. The Middle District of Alabama, Judge Frank M. Johnson, Jr. Even this early in his judicial career had a proven record of following the decisions of the Supreme Court. He did this at the expense of being socially ostracized by the white establishment, and being severely and unjustly criticized by politicians, the media, and other influential white institutions and leaders. The home of Judge Johnson's mother was bombed, and it was assumed that the bombers had meant the device for him, but were confused by the similarity of his father's name and went to the wrong address. Brown versus Board of Education quite simply declared that public education, public segregation is not equal. Never has been equal. It never could be equal, and thus violated the Constitution. Now, this decision was welcomed by African Americans as if it were a second emancipation. But there was a catch. Having made its ruling, the court failed to carefully and completely spell out how this tremendous change in the social order was to be implemented and enforced by the legislative and executive branches of government. Instead, the court simply declared that public integration happened at all deliberate speed.
Federal troops escorted 2 Negro students into the University of Alabama Tuesday, putting an end to Governor Wallace's defiance and sweeping aside the last symbolic bastion of school segregation in the South. Wallace again was standing in the schoolhouse door as the Negro students arrived for the second time, but this time he stepped aside. Wallace, nervously reading from a wrinkled piece of paper, said,
"But for the unwarranted federalization of the National Guard, I would be Commander-in-Chief. It is a bitter pill to swallow."
The quality of education in the schools was a big topic of discussion. The fact of separate but equal, all of that. And I remember my parents coming home and I was talking about Birmingham and Little Rock being on the television and played out over and over again. And I remember my parents talking about the fact that there was a segregated high school in our own community, and that was the Tuskegee High School. We just knew we were not allowed to go to that school because of some law that existed, but this again led to much discussion about the fact that schools that were segregated were not a good thing, because you can learn from differences as well as similarities, and that at some point, that needed to change.
When my oldest brother, Detroit Lee Jr., was in elementary school, my father went to attorney Fred Gray because he wanted to file a lawsuit that pushed for the integration of public schools. He was tired of blacks getting old books and suffering from inadequate materials. He wanted a truly equal school system. However, attorney Gray and my father decided that the time was not quite right. There was too much other things going on, and they wanted to wait for the perfect time. That time just happened to come when I was about to enter my senior year of high school. In 1963, Anthony T. Lee et al. v. Macon County Board of Education was filed.
The Macon County school case began similarly to the other school cases I filed in Alabama, but had some key differences. For one thing, the county population was and is about 85% African American. For another thing, the county is home to the Tuskegee Institute, now known as Tuskegee University, founded in 1881. There was well-organized African American activism in the county in the form of the Tuskegee Civic Association, or the TCA. A third big difference is that after the case was filed, and the court's order for racial integration for the schools in Macon County, the local white citizens prepared to do so without further struggle. That led to the fourth and biggest difference. The injection by Governor George C. Wallace of state politics into this local school case. On July 16, 1963, Judge Frank Johnson, as was his practice, added the United States government as a party. Judge Johnson recognized the problem of enforcement of his decrees. He wanted to be sure the United States government was a party to the action as the case progressed, so that when he entered an order, he could expect the United States government to enforce it.
Alabama is face to face with the cold reality of accepting some token integration in 4 public school systems this fall. Some undoubtedly welcome this step. Still, others are determined to prevent this at all costs. Certainly, the majority of Alabamians have reasoned by now that integration is bound to happen. Tuskegee has its orders from a Montgomery federal judge to take immediate steps towards integration. A selection committee was formed to select the black students that would integrate. Meetings were held, and the people decided they wanted to have a peaceful integration. It didn't work out that way, though.
My parents asked if we would be interested in joining this case, and My sister and I readily said yes, well, why not? And that led them to this escalating movement to join the case of Lee versus Macon County as part of the plaintiff group.
The community got together and wanted to plan things so there wouldn't be any problems. It was the white community and the black community, because they were trying to be fairly progressive there also. There was the black community that was mostly Tuskegee Institute, that was the sort of educated. You've always had a schism between the regular folks and the educated black folks, because they wanted to present a certain atmosphere, a certain air. So it was a sort of selection committee as to who would be doing the integration of the school.
My mother's baby brother was one of the first blacks to attend the University of Texas in Austin. And Austin's where I originally came from. So I think it was kind of her idea that he did this, so Willie can do this too. So when it actually came down to going, I don't think I was ever officially told by my parents that, you know, we've entered you into this suit with Lee versus Macon County, and you've been one of the students that's been chosen to go. So it's kind of out of right field.
When it became real to me was the day my mother woke me up and said, get up and get dressed, because I was going to take a test to see if I can get into the school. I remember asking my mother, why are we doing this? And she and my father said that it was to get the opportunity to have the same education as everyone else. I know all three of us, me and my brothers, our reaction was that we didn't want to go to that school. But the last thing I wanted to do was to disappoint my parents. So I went in there to take the test, to do the very best that I could to make them proud. That's why I did it, to make my parents proud.
Well, one hot summer afternoon, my dad called to the house, and he told my mom to take me downtown to take a test to see if I could get into the white high school. That was the first time I'd heard anything about it. I took the test.
Starting today, August 25th, and continuing for 3 days, Negro students requesting to transfer to Tuskegee High School are taking the Otis Mental Ability Test and the Stanford Achievement Test. According to Principal E.W. Wadsworth, along with the test scores, the cumulative school record, including academic grades, attendance record, personality rating, vocational preference, the education and occupation of the parents, and teacher comments or anecdotal remarks on each student will be carefully studied. Parents and students will be interviewed as well.
It was no problem. It was an easy test. And next thing I knew, I was going to that high school, which was kind of a disappointment because I had my mind set on going to Tuskegee Institute High School. I was going into the 9th grade, and my dad basically said, you're going. It wasn't a choice. And I mean, I was a little disappointed because I was planning on a different social life, I guess, but I could understand the point.
Now, my brothers had not been selected, and my brothers were so jubilant and happy they had not been selected. And I was disappointed that I had been selected. But I was like, oh well.
13 Negro students have been approved for transfer today. 3 were seniors, 1 was a junior, 3 were sophomores, 4 were freshmen, and 2 were 8th graders. However, no panic has been reported, and only a handful of transfer requests from white students have been made.
What made me say yes to the question was, by that point, my parents had instilled such a deep understanding and respect for the need for change, to right the wrongs of things that needed to be righted. They had stood for that in their own lives. I saw my mother over and over again stand for that. I saw my father stand for that. It was a collection of values and beliefs and insistences that had been incorporated into the very fabric of our lives. So this was a situation that was presented as needing to change for all of the right reasons. And I felt that it was something that certainly I want to do. I want to be involved in it. I can help that. My parents did a lot of talking to us, checking in on our emotions, checking in on how we were feeling about it, giving us the opportunity to change our minds if we chose to.
My parents were active in the community, in the civil rights community. There was a group of us, all the kids. The parents talked first and decided what they would do, and their kids would be involved. Afterwards, they talked to us about doing it. I was always very interested in the civil rights issue, so I thought it was exciting. I'm sure we all had our reservations, but I don't remember any of us being really scared. It seemed and felt exciting, but fearful at the same time.
Speaking with C.A. Pruitt, the superintendent of schools, he's been out canvassing the mood in Tuskegee.
I'm convinced beyond any reasonable doubt that everything had been done which could have been done to meet the situation in an orderly and peaceful manner. I was assured by responsible citizens that law and order would prevail.
He is confident that the town will cooperate and that police protection will be provided if necessary. It was particularly somewhat of a turmoil for me in that my mother and dad were progressive thinkers. They believed that we should not panic, we should not leave the public school system, we should not leave town. We should stay, to work with the black people in the community, to keep a peaceful community, and to keep the schools open and functioning properly.
Some of the older folks in the community, and when I say older, I mean 40 or 50, they had more feeling for it than I ever thought it would be. At the time, I worked at the neighborhood grocery store, and people would come in all the time, and when they released the names of those who would be going, they would say things like, "You need to be careful. I wish you good luck. I'm praying for you." But I never thought about it much. At 17, you don't really think about dying, unfortunately. You think you're gonna live forever. You think dying is for the old.
I think that some in the community didn't understand this movement, did not understand why we would want to do this, and so there was ambivalence over that. Even in our church, people saying things to my parents like, "How could you put your children in this situation? How could you put them in harm's way like this?" Which was very troubling, I think, for my mother as a mother, and because some of these people were friends.
I remember the Sunday before school integrated that Monday. I remember standing in my front yard, just dragging my foot in the gravel in a figure eight. I was barefoot and it was hot, but I was just trying to decide what I would do because I knew that 13 black kids would show up among all of the white kids, a bunch of whom were going to be very angry and maybe doing and saying some hurtful things. So I played out a fantasy of it, and it was like, would I intervene? Would I stand up? Would I try to become friends with someone? What would happen to me if I did? I pretty much decided that if I liked somebody, I'd be friends with them. I wasn't just going to be friends with them because they showed up, but just going to let the chips fall where they may.
Word came to us within a week or two before it happened. We went through the whole summer bursting, looking forward to going to school. We knew we were going to have an extra good football team that year. They had a new coach, and he had met with us several times. All the stuff going on in the world, we didn't get involved with it. We were focused on playing ball. That's all we were doing.
I decided to run for vice president of the student council for the next year. I was the youngest that had ever done it because I'd be serving in the 10th grade. Nobody thought I stood a chance, but I won. I thought maybe I'd found something I could really do. I started getting involved in student council stuff, and integration was a topic that showed up early and often. We knew the school would be integrated that upcoming year, and at that point I decided I wanted to be a part of whatever we had to do. Several of us arranged meetings during the summer to discuss what was going to happen. We even planned assembly programs for when school got started to get everyone acclimated to what was going to happen.
I was on the student council too, and we were meeting next door at the hotel. And a lot of the discussion focused on what are we going to do. Everyone was geared up to make it work, but some people were also pissed. I remember being pretty mad that my life was being disrupted, but I also remember realizing that there was this moral issue in front of me. And a lot of the discussion on student council focused on how to keep the white culture as intact as possible. And I remember discussions of should there be white fraternities and sororities, clubs, white formations within an integrated high school that allowed the kind of social life to continue.
When we first started our meetings, it was all students. We didn't have adults. We were 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, and we thought we could solve the problems of the world. We thought we could do anything. So we weren't meeting with advisors. We weren't meeting with anybody that was telling us what to do. We just decided this is what we want to do. As far as I knew, everybody was going to school. I never had anybody tell me they weren't going to go to school. It wasn't the kids that were the problem. It was the parents that were the problem.
On the scene of an unofficial meeting of the Tuskegee Parents and Teachers Association. There are approximately 400 people present, including angry members of the Citizens Council who repeatedly accused Superintendent Pruitt of caving in to federal pressures. As a member of the State Building Commission, I promise you that your children do not have to attend integrated schools. The state will provide tuition grants so that our children do not have to go to school with Negroes. They just don't want you to know that.
We can organize a private school and we do not have to put up with this.
While many people came to the meeting resigned to the court-ordered integration, it appears as if a great deal of anger has been generated, that there's now some momentum for a private school movement. Some members at this meeting did circulate a petition asking Governor Wallace to intervene. At this point, 13 Negro students are slated to begin classes on September 2nd.
Further, there is concern in Tuskegee that strongly segregationist whites from the county's northern area may seek to interfere. The Ku Klux Klan, an organization to be reckoned with in Alabama, reports heavy support in the area and in adjoining counties. The Kennedy administration's concern over the Tuskegee situation was demonstrated this week by the frequent visits of Justice Department attorneys to the city to confer with local officials.
There was a meeting with the parents of the students approximately a week before school started. The Justice Department had representatives there. The meeting was at the barber shop, right on Church Street and Montgomery Road.
What you are entering into is something that you have a right to do. There are some things that might happen, but I want you to understand that we are here to protect you. There's a U.S. Marshal Service that has set up headquarters out of the VA hospital. You'll be watched. You'll be guarded. We'll be with you.
John Doerr painted such a vivid picture of what could happen, down to saying,
You may leave here today and not come back home. Something bad could happen. You need to know that. That's a reality. How does that make you feel? Do you still want to go?
and I think for me, the reality of the magnitude of what could happen just hit me like a ton of bricks. I remember feeling it, digesting it, comprehending it, and then saying yes. But I'm still going. And my sister said the same thing.
Unless somebody physically touches you, we cannot intervene. We will be watching. We will be observing. But unless somebody physically touches you, we cannot intervene.
They will be watching.
They will be observing.
But unless someone physically touches us, they cannot intervene. I had a crush on John Doerr. He came to our house frequently. I say he just comes in the evening so he can eat. For him being the assistant attorney general, I felt I was as close to the president as I could get. You know, knowing that Robert Kennedy was the attorney general at that time. From that point, we had federal marshal escorts everywhere we went. I didn't see them when I looked outside, but if we got in a car and went anywhere, they were there.
The week before school, lots and lots of conversations. With my parents, on the phone, with other plaintiffs, with the attorney, just lots of conversations. My sister and I talked a lot. We felt like we were about to participate in one of the greatest moments of our lives. You know, we heard the stories on the news about this integration of the schools in Tuskegee, of the school in Tuskegee. We heard conversations, very hate-filled conversations from people about how wrong it was, better not happen and that kind of thing. There was a degree of fear in the town around this event about to happen. There was a lot of tension leading up to the first day of school.
Which side are you on?
Which side are you on? Most students and their families woke up on September 2nd, 1963, anticipating the start of a new school year, knowing that several black students would be enrolled. My mother decided to walk us to school that morning because she thought there might be bystanders from other places and news reporters. My 7-year-old brother walked with us.
We lived half a block from the school. You could throw a rock and hit the school. It's funny the things you remember and don't remember, but that day I remember. That day has been imprinted in my mind for my entire life. I can't escape it. On the morning school was supposed to get started, my daddy came in and woke me up. And it was real early in the morning, which was kind of unusual. And he said, "Get up and look out the window." And all I saw was state troopers parked in front of my house and up the street. I looked down at the high school and that was all I saw.
You couldn't go past the Ford's house and everybody was lined up in Miss Ford's yard. I think there were 100 troopers there and another 100 came.
Governor Wallace today ordered the integrated opening of Tuskegee High School delayed for a week and ringed the red brick building with state troopers to make certain the order would be enforced. Wallace invoked what he said were his police powers as chief executive officer of the state government in holding the opening of the institution which was to become the first all-white public school in Alabama to admit Negroes.
Whereas it is the express intention of the governor of the state of Alabama to preserve the peace, maintain domestic tranquility, and protect the lives and property of all citizens of this state. Now, therefore, I, George C. Wallace, as governor of the state of Alabama, and in conformity with the constitutional and statutory power vested in me as governor of said state, do hereby order and direct the Macon County Board of Education, Macon County, Alabama, to delay the opening of Tuskegee High School for a period of 1 week until, to wit, Monday, September 9, 1963, for the sole and express purpose of allowing the governor of the state of Alabama to preserve the peace, maintain domestic tranquility, and to protect the lives and property of all citizens of the state of Alabama.
We had the order from the Supreme Court to integrate the schools, and we were prepared to follow this order through. We wanted to send the children on bicycles to school and treat this like it was any other day. We talked to our children and the children in the neighborhood, and we said, go do your business and study your lessons and do your best. Just don't talk about it. We sent them on bicycles. And they came right back home because state troopers were surrounding the school elbow to elbow, refusing to let them into their own school. I couldn't believe this had happened.
When we arrived, we were shocked to find our school surrounded by Governor Wallace's mounted state troopers, with the message that the school had been closed for fear of violence. My only fear was generated by the presence of those troopers. My mother, Alice Lee Howard Wadsworth, bravely led several of us students up to one state trooper to tell him we wanted to attend school.
So I decided to get dressed and go outside. By then, several people in the neighborhood had come out and they told us nobody's going to school. They said the governor had decided that Tuskegee High School wasn't going to be integrated. I remember thinking, how could they do this? I didn't understand, and I wasn't old enough to know the workings of the world. I didn't understand how they could do something like this. I panicked because I thought, I've got to go to school. I'm supposed to go to school today, and they said nobody's going to school today. I went into the house and called Judy Johnson, the student council president. She lived on the other side of the school, and she said,
"It's the same thing over here. You can't get near the school. You may as well just relax, because we're not going to school today."
My mother walked up to the state troopers and said, "I'm going to teach the black children, and there's not going to be any problem with that because they're going to be under my wing."
Governor George C. Wallace defiantly challenged the federal government on Monday by using hundreds of armed state troopers to choke off school desegregation in Birmingham, Mobile, and Tuskegee. Segregationist governor's actions set Negro attorneys scurrying into federal courts to get orders to prevent him from interfering with integration. Negro attorneys regarded the enjoining of Wallace as the first step towards getting President Kennedy to send troops or U.S. Marshals to Alabama, or take whatever action necessary to see federally ordered school desegregation is carried out. In Tuskegee, the Negro students scheduled to attend were kept from the scene for their safety.
Closing of the public school in Tuskegee was a very serious matter. After carefully reviewing the events of the day at home that evening, I concluded that if Wallace, as governor of Alabama, had the authority under state law to close down a public school to prevent integration, then he must have the authority to use that same state power to further integration in all public elementary and secondary schools in Alabama. This realization hit me like the burning bush speaking to Moses. I could not wait until the next day. At about 10:30 in the evening, I got on the telephone with my associates and clerical staff and told them to get to the office within the hour. In response to the governor closing Tuskegee Public School, I wanted us to prepare an immediate motion for temporary restraining order, a motion for an order to show cause, and an amendment to the complaint in Lee versus Macon County Board of Education. I wanted to file these documents as soon as possible to show Governor Wallace and the world that we were serious and that we meant business. I thought if we were successful, there would be no need to file 98 separate lawsuits, and no other African-American parents would be subject to reprisals as a plaintiff in any other school desegregation case. There would be no more segregation in the Alabama public school system. In less than an hour, my entire staff is at the office ready to work. That staff consisted of my law clerk, Edwin L. Davis, my wife, Bernice, who was my secretary in those years, and me. That was not the first time we worked all night in a crisis. By morning, we were ready. We filed motions for a temporary restraining order and for an order to show cause, while Governor George C. Wallace should not be made party defendant and not be enjoined from obstructing or preventing compliance with the court's order requiring for racial integration for the schools in Macon County. Not only did we file these motions, but the governor was served the legal paperwork that same day. He was astonished at how quickly we reacted to his closing the Tuskegee school. Wallace appeared shaken on the 6 o'clock news that evening. He must have thought we had spies in his administration. Of course, he was wrong. All it took was one hard night of work and a few hundred years of getting motivated.
The Southern Education Reporting Service, which keeps a close tab on desegregation, reported last week that of 144 Southern school districts admitting Negro pupils for the first time this fall, 124 were doing so voluntarily. The rest were desegregated under court order. Only minor instances of disorder have been reported anywhere outside Alabama as the fall of segregation continues. As Alabamans survey the peaceful scene elsewhere in the South, they must be asking themselves, what goes on here? What goes on, they must conclude, is that they are being bullied and intimidated by a governor who has long since forfeited the support of the thoughtful citizens of his state. Mr. Wallace has already lost that phase of his war. He's bound to lose all the way. The sooner he realizes it, the better for him and Alabama.
I've heard a lot about states' rights, but what about cities' rights? Where's our lingo? Tell our lingo to get them out. Get your darn troopers out of here. We want our kids to go to school.
Plans had been made to integrate peacefully according to the court order, and that did not appear that we were going to have any trouble Monday. I feel that this is an invasion of Macon County by the governor, who talks about letting local people solve their problems, but then violates these principles.
People in Macon County are capable of handling this problem.
For a long time, I feared Russia, but now I'm wondering if the danger is not Montgomery instead of Russia.
We're going to preserve our school system just as it is and not allow a jungle system in Alabama.
Having talked with individual members of the board following a conference with representatives of the governor and with the Attorney General of Alabama, and having considered Executive Order Number 9 of Governor George C. Wallace and the restraining order of the Federal District Court, which the board and the superintendent is now under, and the common good, welfare, and benefit of the schools and people of Macon County, the members of the board have determined it is their duty to operate the schools of Macon County.
Although there has been no violence as of yet, Governor Wallace has dispatched 100 more troopers to Tuskegee, bringing the number present to over 215. Sheriff Jim Clark's Dallas County mounted police officers have also arrived on the scene. They formed a barricade around the school, and no one but the principal has been allowed to enter.
The picture has been painted all over the county that Macon County is ready and willing to accept integration in their schools. There are a lot of people who do not agree with the statements that have been made. Information has been secured that the school can operate with tuition grants as provided by law through the local Board of Education. We believe that we are acting in the best interest of all people. Our group is planning ways and means of providing a school that parents may choose in lieu of an integrated school as prescribed by Alabama law.
I assure the Macon County School Foundation that it has my full and firm support. You will have schools for your children in Tuskegee, and I will lend the full resources of my office to help you.
What happened after that first day was a siege. I would wake up every morning and these people would never leave. These people camped outside my house for at least 2 weeks. We all got to know the state troopers because they were there and the kids in the neighborhood were talking to them. They were doing their job. They were just there because they were told they had to be there. It was during that period that the sides were really drawn and the line was really put down that you knew you were on this side or this side. Whatever anxiety people had that summer had not quite boiled over. Everybody was a little anxious and suspicious. But seeing this presence of these people in that little town, it just destroyed it. People were screaming and hollering at each other. People who had been friends forever. Families split. Cousins wouldn't speak to cousins. It got so close then and so personal then. You would see it when you would go to church. You would have this group over there saying, "How can y'all not do this?" And the other saying, "This will never happen." Before that, all summer long, I had not seen this once. Never, ever.
There was a segment of the townspeople who were very in favor of integration. And Governor Wallace sent representatives to turn people against integration. It swayed some people, and so the town was very divided.
Divided to the point of, if you believed in integration, you walked on one side of the street and segregationists walked on the other side. They ostracized families and we were very much persecuted. Called on the phone and told that crosses would be burned in our yard. It terrified me. I had a lot of fear because my father had died and my mother and 2 younger siblings were in the house. And I never used this word, but it was used on the phone. "You nigger lover, we're not going to have your mother teaching."
Most of the faculty of Tuskegee High School, 20 teachers, were turned away for the 3rd consecutive day today by armed state troopers. Principal E.W. Wadsworth led the contingent of teachers to the school grounds, but was told sorry the school was still closed. He turned to the teachers, thanked them, and told them they were still on payroll. He also told them to go home and work up a good lesson. Only a few persons other than teachers were there, and school buses returned empty.
No, we didn't go to class. Matter of fact, we had played the first football game and had never been to class.
We practiced right up and played the first game, but then after that it was all over. I think there was a lot of concern by the adults in the community. There was a lot of pressure on us as players not to go to school, not to play ball. And I think somewhere along the line a bunch of men got together and they promised us that if we did that, then they would start a school to have us play. Well, of course, that was hard on me. I was a junior. It was tough on those boys who were seniors. Anyway, we had a team meeting. We called it together. It was at a hotel. Someone had put up a suggestion or made a nomination that we disband the team. And we had a great coach in Dean Macon. He tried to convince us that that should not be the thing we do. But I guess with the pressure from the older adults when they took the votes, I know it was a majority vote, but I think maybe one or two dissented. After the majority vote, it was decided to disband the team.
Closed school didn't stop our first football game, so I was a cheerleader. One game.
This morning, the 13 Negro students are going to attempt to desegregate Tuskegee Public High School. Governor Wallace has vowed to stop this.
When the integration actually happened, there were 13 of us black students.
Even though I don't remember being afraid, I'm sure we were. We were probably trying so hard not to appear afraid. I think there was a lot of apprehension because we knew the white townspeople were opposed to integration. And we had certainly seen all the beatings and heard about the bombings.
I remember getting ready for school. My parents took me to the Board of Education building, which was actually across the street, kind of catty-corner from Tuskegee High School, where we were to attend. And we met with the superintendent, and there was some kind of orientation. And then we got on the bus, a school bus, and went half a block on the bus to the school.
The main thing I remember about the day of immigration was the Dallas County Sheriff's Department on horses. It was a very dramatic, traumatic scene. This was at the state level, the highway patrolman. It was not really at the county level.
These were the folks who were charged to Selma Bridge. This wasn't just any Alabama law enforcement, this was that particular fascist cadre set. I remember being under the bushes in Miss Fort's yard, looking out through people's feet, trying to take it all in. I was 13, 14, and there was the school I had grown up in. Grammar school, middle school, going to high school. It had been so much of my life, and now there was all this commotion.
We heard the threats and the taunts, particularly when we started going on the bus to school. I remember the first day. We went down on the bus, and I remember thinking that I wasn't really afraid because my father was there, and I could see him. As long as I could see my father, I felt empowered in a way. It was my father and John Doe. And because John Doe represented the federal government, that made a difference to my sitting on that bus and the level of fear I had. So whenever I saw my father, I felt like I could do anything. And I didn't have to take a lot. It was frightening. At the same time, it was kind of empowering. I saw the troopers, and I'd seen them on TV. And oftentimes, the state troopers would be the ones who were, in a lot of instances, beating people and protecting people who were beating black people. You were conscious of that. But you thought you were right. And so that made it even more compelling.
As we got over there, there was a regiment of state troopers there, and Captain Pyre got on the bus and read another proclamation from Governor Wallace.
Whereas the threat of forced and unwarranted integration of the public schools of this state is detrimental to the public interest, and whereas the integration of public schools will totally disrupt, effectively destroy the educational process, and constitutes an abridgment of the civil rights of other children attending the schools, and deprives them of equal protection of the law, and constitutes the deprivation of their rights, liberty, and property without due process of law. And now, Therefore, I, George C. Wallace, as governor of the state of Alabama, and in conformity with the constitutional and statutory power vested in me as governor of said state, do hereby order and direct that no student shall be permitted to integrate the public schools of the city of Tuskegee, Alabama.
Captain Pryor told us that the governor had made the decision and told the bus driver to turn the bus around, and he handed out copies of the proclamation. I remember my sister in an absolute act of defiance, but feeling very comfortable and confident in doing what she was doing because she knew it was wrong. Taking the proclamation,
I just took it and I tore it up in front of him. And I remember that feeling. Empowerment. The right thing to do. That we were doing something that was almost righteous. I do remember that. I also remember looking back and seeing my father.
So my first day was roughly 1 hour, from the time I got on the bus to the time we got back to Superintendent Pruitt's office.
Governor Wallace withdrew the troopers, but replaced them with National Guardsmen. In Washington, a White House spokesman said President Kennedy would await developments before taking action.
At dawn Tuesday, the National Guardsmen, armed with bayonets, took up positions at the beleaguered schools. In Washington, President Kennedy signed 2 documents. One, a proclamation that directing the governor to cease and desist from the unlawful obstructions of justice. An hour later, the president signed the second document, an executive order federalizing the National Guard. Within minutes, the guardsmen were whisked back to their armories. With a way cleared, the 20 Negro students entered white schools in Birmingham, Mobile, and Tuskegee.
I have lost the battle against the whole armed might of the U.S. I cannot fight bayonets with my bare hands.
The bayonets have been removed from the scene, and I believe the desegregation has been accomplished without the federal presence.
I will continue to fight through legislation.
Wednesday of that week, we were told we were going back to school. So we met in Pruitt's office again, and as we rounded the corner coming up on the school, there were no state troopers. There was, however, the Alabama National Guard that had been federalized by President Kennedy. So we went inside and did the proper registration. There were roughly grades 8 through 12 there, maybe 50 white students. As the day went on, though, that number dwindled because parents were coming to take them out. And by the end of the day, there were probably 6.
Later that week, I remember seeing a couple of the black students walk across the breezeway between the grammar school and the high school. And I just had this sense, these are kids. This could be me. I had this sense of identification with them, and everything just seemed crazy. It seemed crazy to me. They seemed lonesome. Later on, when I heard some of their oral histories, they were these historical agents, very proud of the roles they were playing. I was the one who was lonesome, but for me it was just like, these are her kids, like me.
The next week, school reopened, and I was finally able to start classes. The new black students also began classes. However, a plan for a private school was now being developed, so only a small number of white students, along with the new black students, sat in those lonely classrooms that week. The teachers seemed like they wanted to make this new situation work. I was amazed at the courage of the few black students in my classes, but I never had the courage to speak to them. I was so sad later that week when Daddy came to take me home from school in the middle of the day. For my safety, he said. I knew then that my school days and family life were headed for upheaval.
I felt like I was a part of the movement and that it was a righteous movement. I don't remember feeling much about the white kids because I think the expectation was that they weren't going to stay anyway. And I don't remember feeling bad that they weren't there. I just remember expecting that they wouldn't be there.
The thing that struck me immediately, the very first day that I went to my science class was, I saw this incredible science lab, fully equipped close to state-of-the-art equipment I'd never seen in my life, and I immediately made the contrast with my old lab at Tuskegee Institute High School, where there were Bunsen burners. That's all that kids had to do experiments on. That was the extent of the lab, so there was no equal anywhere. It was definitely separate. I saw books that were fresh, new, whereas we had old books, tattered books, names written all in them, scribbles in the margins from somebody else's handwriting, always secondhand books, and here I'm looking at new, fresh books. Bookshelves laden with beautiful new books. There was a brightness in the science lab. Sunlight streaming into this amazing equipment, things that I had never seen, and I realized immediately how different it was. I think that's the piece that will forever stick in my mind of, an example of why what we were doing was so important, why it needed to be done, that this kind of exposure may never have happened.
White students are flocking to Notasulga and shorter high schools and away from Tuskegee. Teachers are being shuttled between the schools, and many have resigned or been reassigned. This is an unsustainable and burdensome situation.
The threats are continuing, and Mother is not the only one receiving them.
I've heard if you refuse to teach at Macon Academy, it goes badly for you. The commercial teachers' ties have been flattened.
One board member had his barn burned down.
The whole town is coming apart. You can't even go to church without an argument.
Well, crosses have been burned in front of 2 Board of Education members' homes, and others have received serious vandalism and threats.
However, some Tuskegee teachers, such as Dot Aiken, refused to leave. She told this reporter, "I never taught a more cooperative or interested group of students. Lesson assignments and extra reading materials were always completed and handed in on time. They did everything to prove they had come to get a better education. They showed a deep appreciation for any and all consideration given them by their teachers."
I guess things were going pretty good for us because we were having individualized instruction. At the time, we didn't know how good it was, and I think that went on to around November. Then the Macon County Board of Education came up with a plan. All the white kids had left by then. The Board of Education said, this school is not going to be efficiently run with only 12 students. So this school will be closed.
The town was split so sharply down the middle that it just cleaved so many of those relationships. My mother's best friends were the Parkers, Alan and Eva Parker. My mother and Eva Parker were mothers together, and their children would go back and forth between the houses, and I still have pictures of birthday parties with Glenn and Neil for our first, second, and third birthdays. When the Parkers went with the integrationists, then both sides just stopped speaking. My mother had this bitterness, and she didn't speak to Eva for years. So many of the relationships between white families ended. Lots of white families. Also, people left town, including many of my friends. My family stayed, but lots of people left town. My mother and Eva got to where they would speak, but there was too much gone. So I would say they got to where they... I know that Eva came to my mother's funeral. I think they hurt each other profoundly and lost so much of that deep friendship that there's just no way you can go and put it back together again.
I think it demolished the camaraderie and the spirit we had going of working hand in hand in a peaceful coexistence. I think it needed to change. But somehow in that change, we lost the town. It's really because people did not know how to work together.
We as kids formed a bond between ourselves of commitment. This was something we were going to do. We had all decided it on our own. We were going to be there for each other. And we were, no matter what.
But when the outsiders started coming in, especially these movie star people, and people that just, well, you know, people in the South don't take, back then, didn't take good to outsiders coming in and trying to tell you what you needed to do. To me, it just created more problems than it helped. And then, of course, you have the confrontation between Governor Wallace and President Kennedy. That was just like two mules butting heads.
If George Wallace would have left it alone, I know it could have been different. I don't know what would have happened, but it wouldn't have been like it was. The schools in Macon County would not have been destroyed. Most of the people in Tuskegee, they cared for each other. Maybe we would have decided, we can't do this. We can't deal with this. But it wouldn't have been with animosity. It was just horrible having people who wouldn't even speak to each other. I blame him for that. I really do.
If they had known, if they had gotten to know the families who were going to integrate and had been over to sit down and talk with these families so that they were not the big bad monster, which they were not, but by some white people's standards they were, I think trust would have been established.
The situation was taken out of our hands completely by Governor Wallace. If we had been left alone, I think we would have been fine and integrated peacefully. Not perfectly fine, because it would have been a large adjustment. But we were prepared to integrate that day.
I think the teachers and most of the white students would have cooperated. Racial prejudice would not have disappeared, and there might have been tension and a few unpleasant incidents, but we might have learned something about tolerance and justice. I would have liked that opportunity.
And now, here I am, back living in Tuskegee. We still have a long, long way to go, but things are certainly better. You have to remember all the sacrifices that were made in various ways to get us where we are now. From my experiences, I've learned you have to be prepared because you never know when the opportunity will arise to make a difference. Take the chance because you never know what might happen. You never know.
And my burning desire has always been to know the impact desegregation had on them, if they were traumatized by it, if it was a challenge and they went on to soar to great heights, which I have a feeling they did. I'm in touch with one of them now, and she says she still feels my mother's spirit around her, and that means so much.
Because of the events that happened in '63, in some other way, I think has made race relations better today. You know, you realize that we're all human beings, and we just need to be there to help one another. Even now, I reflect on it as being a time when you really search your soul and see what decisions you could have made, what decisions you should have made, the ones you did make, and the ones you wrestled with.
I want young people to realize that ordinary people are the ones who change the course of history, even more than the famous men and women in history books.
I was thinking about it sitting in a Tuskegee University board meeting. I'm on the board down there, and I've gotten real close to two retired military guys, General Chuck Williams and an Atlanta businessman named Felker Ward. And he was a helicopter pilot in Vietnam, did 2 tours. Now these are as fine a 2 men as I've ever known. Solid family men, good Christian men, served their countries with distinction. And I sat and looked at them and said, you know what? 40 years ago, I would not have been able to have lunch with them in Tuskegee. You know, that was wrong.
Well, I look back at it now sometimes and I just can't believe that I actually did it. And I think the reason I was able to get through it was because I never thought I could die from it. I didn't know how mean and vicious people really could be. I was just a kid. It was a carefree life. We need to reflect on that part of history and say that it's shocking that that could happen, but it did. And now we need to move forward. We are all human beings, and we are here for a limited time. And once that time's gone, well, it's gone.
We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Our history is getting diluted, and the younger generations are not being taught the importance of these events. And things weren't always the way it is now. And we're not very far from it going back. 50 years.
Ultimately, Lee versus Macon County was appealed to the United States Supreme Court and was affirmed. There are probably over 300 different opinions which have been written on various aspects of the case. The case was important for many reasons. 1, we integrated all of Alabama's remaining segregated public schools in this one lawsuit. This was an efficient means of dispensing justice. It was both time efficient and cost efficient. Individual students and their parents did not have to file separate suits to integrate schools and be subjected to reprisals when they became plaintiffs. 2, the sweeping order integrated all colleges, which were then under the control of the State Board of Education, without the necessity of filing a lawsuit. 3, it merged the African American High School Athletic Association and the White High School Athletic Association, thus leading the way for African American athletes in high school to gain recognition for their achievements. With increased recognition, these athletes received publicity, which attracted the attention of coaches from larger colleges and universities. As a result, many African American student athletes have gone on to become sports professionals. 4, all state trade school, junior colleges, technical schools, and all other colleges under the control of the State Board of Education were integrated in this order. The case is still alive and well. Whenever there are problems existing in any of the local school systems or any problems existing in any of the other institutions under the control of the State Board of Education, there is no need to file a new lawsuit. Relief can be sought simply by going back into court under Lee versus Macon County.
For Alabama, I hope there's hope. I'd hope that once a white power structure would see African Americans functioning well, that would really cause a change of heart. The fight of the African American and the fight of the average white person, and I'm talking about from your middle to your lower income bracket people, their destiny is joined together. And if they ever got together, it would mean those people who have been playing the races against each other would no longer have controlling power. And the majority of people would in fact have the power.
For the most part, in this country, I think that black people and white people live in parallel, almost universes. They walk along the same streets, side by side. They go to their jobs, they go to their homes, they go to their churches, but they very rarely truly intersect and know each other. I think black people probably know white people better than white people know black people culturally, and what happens in their homes, and what happens in their churches. There's a lot of vestiges of institutionalized racism and discrimination that are still here. I'm not saying that there hasn't been some changes for the better, but until that conversation, that honest conversation about race is held in this country, we'll continue to have these types of problems until maybe the young people, like myself, get out of here. And these young kids have to deal with the world.
Don't be too quick to stereotype the people who were living through this time. All whites were not violent and hateful. Some were confused and afraid. Some wanted change. Compassionate whites were horrified by the extreme violence and hate crimes against blacks in Alabama and in other parts of the country in the 1960s. Unfortunately, however, too many Southern whites were bystanders who failed to take action to protect others.
So from my perspective, African Americans first have to learn to love themselves. They have to see themselves as valid without having to be validated by the larger society. If we can get to that point, then regardless of what happens in this country, it's got to get better for both groups. And if whites could get to a point where they acknowledge having created a country off the free labor of a people and created a system that perpetuates and reinforces white privilege through distortion and lies, then we might just have a chance to heal and create a better place for future generations. You really have to look at it realistically and holistically, where you are as a people and where the other side is as a people. The history we were taught and continue to be taught is based in part on distortions and half-truths. We can't move forward living a lie. I can say this though. You talked about our courage. And I don't take anything from those kids on that bus and that time in Tuskegee that did that. But what I've learned is that children all over the South did that. all over the South. So the courage is definitely out there. Some of us know those things because we were in a time and in a place where they were highlighted and publicized. But there are many, many more whose names will never be known, but who did the same thing, faced the same fear, and in some cases, paid the ultimate price.